Actually, we're right on time. This was the talk at BlinkOn 10 in Toronto, Canada. And remember this, orange deck of slides. Philip and I and Mike talked about interop update. So what's new since then? Back during BlinkOn 10, we announced support for RevTest screenshots, and now we have all the screenshots from like all browsers and on all platforms, Windows, Mac, and Linux. So basically, if you go to wpt.fyi and if you see any RevTest, there should be a screenshot. If not, it's a bug. And then, so Boku has done a pretty good job in terms of rewriting basically the whole documentation site, as well as providing us with a much more reliable w3c test.work. So if you go to wpt.live, you can see like it's basically the same interface as w3c-test.org, but it doesn't crash as often, which is great. We will be changing the links on wpt.fyi soonish, after we go over the RFC process. Besides, we have some updates on browser coverage. We have the new Chromium-based Edge. Also, this nice logos. I really like the logos, by the way. So if there's any Microsoft employee, and if you happen to have, the new Edge sticker, I have a very special place on my laptop that is missing a sticker right now. Yeah, so come find me. We are also running WebKit GTK, and unfortunately, there's no like dedicated logo for that at the moment. So we're using the Epiphany logo from the Genome project. And here's a quick demo of the new Chrome for Android support without requiring root access. So yeah, it just works. And previously, there was a lot of like setup required, like rooting your device, changing your etc hosts. So now that this is not required anymore, and we will be running continuously Chrome for Android soon-ish. This is also thanks to Mozilla providing us with the infrastructure. Stay tuned. So these are some graphs and statistics from the TPAC presentation. The gist of it is that we have more tests and more tests passing. However, browser-specific failures are, well, not great. And there's some jumps in the numbers because of one infrastructure hiccup and another big change in Firefox encoding system. So during TPAC 2019, we actually discussed about our 2020 plans. So improve the quality of the test suite and reliable and actionable PR results on GitHub, test ergonomics, and there was a big pain point about wpt.fyi being not really accessible and usable to all users, and I will work on that. There's also the exciting new feature about triaging test failures. So this is work in progress, and this is just a visual mock. So once we launch the project, you will be able to click on a cell that's not completely passing, and there will be a pop-up in which you can insert a link to, say, an issue tracker, and then once you click the triage button, there will be a GitHub PR automatically created and merged for you. And so this is work in progress by Kyle, who's sitting right here. So if you have any questions or suggestions regarding this particular use case and go talk to him. And then once you have the test triaged, you can filter by links. For example, you can see here, this is filtering by tests that have a link to the Chromium bug tracker. And at the bottom of the page, you can see these triage annotations. So actually, the main topic of today's talk is going to be testing the untestable. So if you go to WPT GitHub repo and if you search, if you filter by labels, there's a label called type untestable. We currently have about 60 of them. Some of them are inherently difficult to test, like print, paged media, multiple screens, grayscale screens, whatever. And then, so there are two particular categories in this type of untestable issues that we want to try to tackle next year. Tests that require custom servers and tests that are currently backed by test-only APIs implemented with MojoJS, for example. And also, by the way, so inside the Blink intent to ship, there's a section for WPT coverage. And if you ever feel like saying this is not easy to test, this is untestable, please file a bug. Otherwise, we wouldn't know. Like, if we see enough, feature requests, we will look into how to provide coverage for this type of use cases. So custom servers. WPT server is written in Python and actually Python 2, and it will not be that by January the 1st, which is sad. But anyways, so Python is not actually great for a lot of these advanced network features. It doesn't have a great, async programming model. You can't actually, do event-driven programming, and has very terrible crypto system. It's linked usually against a very old OpenSSL version, so doesn't even have TLS 1.2 on certain systems. And so here's a concrete feature request from the web transport team. And they want to have basically a quick test server. Eventually, we decided it was quite infeasible to do this in Python, like in WPT serve. So the proposed way forward, this is an experiment. We don't know yet how this will fully turn out. But the rough idea is to have, a standalone server written in, say, Go, Rust, and then you release a statically linked binary. And WPT front-end, the CLI tool, will be responsible for downloading that binary, pretty much in the same way as we download like WebDriver, Chrome driver, Gecko driver, whatever. And then this binary will listen to a dedicated port. There's also the requirement of being able to quickly change the content of the response, basically like scripting the server. This will be finicky. So our idea right now is to have a local loopback from the server to from the quick server to a Python CGI. And the Python script will be inside the main WPT repo that can be easily updated so that you don't have to release a new Go server every time you need to change a response inside your test. And if you have similar use cases, talk to us. And the other big thing is test-only APIs. So here are two examples of that, WebUSB and WebXR. This is basically a set of APIs that are not exposed to the web, like normal users cannot access these APIs. It's usually hidden behind a flag, and in the case of Chrome, it's actually implemented by MojoJS, which means you need sometimes like Mahjong stubs, the generated interfaces for these APIs. So this has been historically problematic because apparently this is Chrome only, and we didn't see like much interest from other browser vendors up until recently. So during TPAC, it turns out Servo is actually implementing WebXR. So this has become our first case ever where a test-only API is actually implemented by another browser engine. And turns out fine, like Servo actually likes the idea. So we want to maybe push this path a little bit forward. And so test-only APIs will be accepted, but there are some rough edges. So in terms of our side, like the WPT infrastructure side, we will have some kind of transparent setup function, and you can do browser-specific things under the hood, and it wouldn't just unconditionally fetch the Mojo resource files, and it wouldn't fail in mysterious ways on Firefox, for example. Like if you haven't implemented this test-only API in a browser, it should fail in a meaningful way. And then, of course, the MojoJS artifacts, we will look into how to properly like archive and release those artifacts, potentially alongside with Chrome and Chrome driver. So in terms of feature owners, Blink engineers, we still strongly suggest you to write an extension for WebDriver, because that will be more interoperable and usable by web developers as well. So if a website wants to test their, for example, advanced web API, they will be able to use that WebDriver extension instead of going through all these hoops and turning on MojoJS. And for whatever reason, if that is not possible or not yet possible because of maybe timing constraint, then try your best to define the test API pretty much at the same level as the main feature API. Like if you have a draft spec, maybe try to write a spec-ish for the test-only API. Like define the API using WebIDL, for example. And if you have any questions, and just feel free to reach out to us. And we are at ecosystem-infra. And these two GitHub repos are for the main WPT and for wpt.fyi dashboard. Feel free to file issues, feature requests. And I forgot the IRC channel. So it's testing on irc.w3.org. So this is supposed to be something in between talk. There's maybe 15 minutes left for questions and suggestions. Anyone concerned about exposing more and more test-only APIs?
So I have a question, which is, why are we allowing test APIs that are not WebDriver on WPT, and then telling feature developers, hey, but actually, we want you to do this other thing instead? For some additional context to the audience, this is spoken by somebody who spent some time writing a WebDriver API instead of a test-only API.
So the WebDriver extension is definitely the recommended way still, because of one of the benefits being web developers can also use it, right? There are cases where it has been very, very challenging for feature owners to implement the test APIs in WebDriver. One example has been Web USB, Web Bluetooth, where they require almost a bidirectional communication channel for like events because they talk to hardware, and USB is hard. I don't know anything about USB. Riley Ground does, so can ask Riley about like why this is almost impossible in WebDriver. Yeah, like in certain cases, we might actually be fine with having test-only APIs first, and then explore perhaps putting this in WebDriver in some ways.
You want to talk a bit about WebDriver too?
So there's this crazy idea about a bidirectional, non-HTTP based, perhaps WebSocket based WebDriver 2.0. And when that becomes a reality, some of these might go away. But for now, like in the next couple years, maybe a lot of the hardware, like protocol related APIs will be challenging to implement in WebDriver.
I'm just super excited. I got you to say when this becomes a reality.
It will, yes. So when this becomes a reality.
So I have a question about the WPT info. So what's the difference between the WPT info and the Chrome info? So we also run the WPT test in the Chrome info, but it's not running against the Chrome. It's running against like the content shell. I think the WPT runs the test against the Chrome, right? And the Firefox and the Safari, probably, I don't know which versions. I guess it's probably the stable.
The last part first. So we run against the different channels. We have actually both stable, beta, and nightly for Firefox, and stable and technology preview for Safari, and all the channels for Edge. And for unrelevant reasons, we don't have Chrome Canary on Linux. So we only have Chrome stable, beta, and dev. The first question, yes, that is a very big concern. So inside the Chromium waterfall or CQ, if you run WPT, it's actually running against content shell using a completely different runner, and that is very hacky. And it's also not testing what we are shipping actually. So Luke on our team is working on actually using the whole upstream WPT runner to run against the full Chrome inside Chromium waterfall. We are seeing good progress, and it will become a reality soon.
So I have one more question. So where is those like the machines? So who maintain those machines to running test?
On upstream?
The WPT.
FYI. Oh yeah, so that is a good question. I guess I forgot to say thanks to Microsoft and Mozilla. So Microsoft provides us with an Azure pipeline to run Windows and Mac VMs, and Mozilla provides us with Linux VMs to run, of course, Linux and also Android emulator soon.
Thank you.
Are there cases that you know of where content shell behaves differently from Chrome and a WPT?
A lot. So content shell doesn't use multi-threads by default, I think.
Correct.
And then we are seeing a lot of tests being super flaky, like against the full Chrome, just because of threading. And then the test author wouldn't know, because when they are writing the test inside Chromium, everything seems fine.
I don't think you're ever going to be able to run web platform tests against threaded content shell or threaded Chrome in Chromium's build infrastructure. This has been a topic of discussion for many years. So I just wanted to alert you to that it's not just the reason for the hack is not sort of neglect. It's really hard to get the threaded Chrome to pass all those tests.
Right. So like, are you concerned about the flakiness?
Yep.
So we are aware of that, and the data so far seems to suggest, at least for WPT, it's not as bad as the legacy layout tests from WebKit. And we are in contact with CHOPS. So this is also like a top concern from CHOPS.
It's not, you should talk to N.
Okay.
Talk to N.
I have strong beliefs in WPT tests. I think like we know all the intent to ship right now, all the intent to ship has an entry saying, do you have test coverage in WPT? And then, but in the old days, many API that ship doesn't have WPT coverage. Is it possible to have some script to fetch fetch active APIs and then compare to the WPT and then saying, oh, this API is not yet tested in WPT?
So that requires a mapping between tests and specs. It is possible in certain areas and to a certain level. So if you want to go down, say like a particular API, like a subsection of the spec, that kind of mapping may not exist. CSS requires, I think, on the section level. Yes, on the section level. So if you can, so for CSS at least, you can say like this section of the specs are tested by these tests, not for some other specs.
In the more general DOM case, I think it's also true that we have some sort of comparison of code coverage for Chrome between web platform tests and just legacy layout tests. So, I mean, DOM things, you can then find functions which are only hit by layout tests and not by web platform tests. And that will find you some, more obviously in the DOM case where there is no coverage in WPT.
Yeah, so I sent out an email to BlinkDev last year, the end of last year, I think. There was I did a comparison of code coverage, and unsurprisingly, like it's mostly some of the older APIs, even some deprecated APIs are not tested by WPT.
You mentioned recently you're adding of screenshots for wpt.fyi for the ref tests. Do you have like estimate how many images are involved and how are those images stored?
I designed the backend, so it's a content-based hashing, content-based indexing system. So we basically deduplicate the images by hashes, and we are only seeing, if I remember correctly, somewhere around less than 100,000 unique images so far. And it's not increasing a lot. Like it basically stabilizes.
Okay, thank you.
As someone who came to web platform tests in the last year and a half or so and came to it as a front-end web developer, I noticed that when front-end web developers want to understand coverage for a new feature, they go to can I use? And the audience for web platform tests seems to be mostly spec editors and browser engineers. Has there ever been any discussion of widening that or reaching out to a broader audience, or what it would take to bring more people into the fold so that there would be more people submitting tests, getting value from tests?
Yes, there has.
Okay, because apparently I have to answer this. The basic answer is there's been a lot of discussion about this over years. The fundamental problem here is that, like, you can't really build can I use data out of web platform tests, because there are plenty of places where there is disproportionate coverage for edge cases that no one's ever actually going to hit. I mean, if you look at the big drop-off in Firefox there, that is simply changing encoding behavior. So decoding of obscure character encodings. Like I think Big 5 was the big thing that changed there. And like how many interrupts bugs that actually cause? Essentially none. So it's not like you couldn't reasonably claim Firefox supported Big 5 before then, because it had for a decade or two. But if you were doing it purely based on data, you'd say, oh no, the majority of tests are failing. This doesn't actually support this. The other side of it is getting more web developers and like involved in web platform tests. And that has always been sort of a go, but not really pursued that much. Like the onboarding is currently pretty terrible. I'm not going to claim otherwise. And often when people try to contribute, it often ends up with a lot of time spent mentoring them for essentially one test case, and then they never appear, and then it becomes this whole of like a lot of people become quite discouraged from putting in the effort to mentor them. No, I think that is getting somewhat better, but a lot of it's questions of how do we actually get more regular contributions more than anything else. And not just sort of one-off things of, oh, I found this one case of things not being interoperable. I reduced this to a 200 kilobyte page. Let's add this to the test suite, because it turns out a 200 kilobyte test is not a great test. And then spending a lot of time working with them to get that into something usable. So there, I mean, there's some level of interest in getting better there, but I don't think we're there yet. And I feel like there's another part of your question as well that I've forgotten. Okay, I've apparently covered everything.
Well, I was going to disagree and or possibly say something slightly different than you, Sam. Firstly, I was going to disagree that edge cases don't matter, because Chrome in whatever it was, 77, swapped the order of those two. There's a spec that says these two errors must be thrown in this order. There was no test. We swapped the order. We broke a major framework.
I am not going to claim that edge cases never matter.
Yeah. I think it's a question of normalization, right? The problem is when you just look at subtests.
You can't just look at the number, because there are, and also it's very hard to tell which edge cases are actually going to end up mattering and which aren't.
Right, yeah. And so I think the most important thing is also that you can't use it for can I use, because we're not at coverage yet. We don't cover the web.
That's also true. But
I mean, that's fair. Yes.
Like the bigger problem is, you know, if you fail a million subtests, but it works in basically every single case except for really stupid, obscure ones, like way more obscure than exception order or something like this, and only invalid content, it's less clear that.
And so there's an argument
matters,
there
right?
that
like,
you just need statistical input to can I use.
Yeah.
Like normalize the test and they say statistically you can use it. But yeah, on the other side, on the developer, individual web developers contributing thing, we have been doing work to improve the onboarding documentation, but the concern about single tests being submitted is real. Like, yeah, people coming along and saying, oh, I found this one thing and here's one test. It doesn't scale. I have wondered about whether we might want to get frameworks on board or large websites that might have an interest. I don't know.
It has been spoken about. There's been little interest from many of them when people have reached out previously. Yeah, I was going to give you.
Once again, so if you haven't seen the new website for the new documentation website, go check it out. It's actually great. Much better than before.
I'm looking forward to looking at that documentation website. So I'm probably coming up to a point where I'll need to add some WebDriver functionality for handling multi-monitor scenarios.
Okay.
And I'm just very unexperienced with web platform tests at all. So am I looking at, doing this onboarding to add a suite of tests for this case, and it's going to take me months, and it's going to take someone, helping me through issues as I encounter them over months. Like, is this?
If you are
what I get to
talking
look forward
about
to?
adding multi-monitor support into WebDriver as an extension, I'm afraid yes. A few months, that sounds about right.
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
What's the current, like, do you have tests currently within Chrome, like in layout tests, or are you just looking at?
There are, Chrome specific web tests, layout tests for window move to, window move by that are single monitor specific, and I'm trying to generalize them.
Right. So the problem is there is currently no testing of this at all.
Exactly.
So any way you go about this, it's going to be introducing some way of mocking out multi-monitor stuff.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, as I think Robert said, the WebDriver case is good to add complexity there and potentially a fair bit of it, but how much more, I don't think I'm qualified to say.
Fair enough.
We're not going to do it for people, but we are very happy to lend our expertise to help you guys. Whenever someone needs to extend WebDriver, try and make the path as obvious as possible. Come talk to us.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, we are actually 2 minutes over. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming, and come talk to us if you have questions.